Have you ever met someone for the first time but felt like you already knew them? This happened to me several times where I would meet people and I realized that after several years of knowing them, how I felt about them upon first meeting them was representative of what our relationship would become. This happened with friends of mine. It even happened with my wife. And it got me thinking about retrocausality. Can the present influence the past? I also heard from an interview guest that I had on, Kit Volcano. He told me that one of his clients had done a bunch of healing work. And when they resolved their personal family trauma, they were able to go back and look at the family photo album. And the photos themselves, and of course the events that the photos came from, were completely different than the previous memories of those photos. So he actually believes that the actual photos were different photos. So it got me thinking, is there any experimental evidence looking into retrocausality? Turns out there is, and this backwards prayer experiment. So these people that were in the hospital, all these people had hospital-acquired infections or sepsis. And they split them into two groups, and they prayed for one group to get better, and they did nothing for the other group. And the group that had the prayer treatment had much better outcomes, like 10 years into the past. They got out of the hospital quicker. They had better health outcomes. They had less total fevers. Really cool for me to see that you could have an effect that far into the past. Now, there's another experiment that was basically measuring in a much shorter term, showing people these images, disturbing or erotic images, and then charting their response before the image would come. And a lot of times, if it was a highly engaging photo, their body would start to show cues beforehand. So pupil dilation, skin conductivity, different ways that they could measure that shows that the body was already anticipating what the image was going to be, even though the image was randomly shown to the person. Now, if we move from these physical experience over into the quantum world, you might already be familiar with the double-slit experiment, where they measure two slits and they shoot a light particle through it, and whether they observe it or not, the light goes through as a waveform. When it's observed, it becomes a particle form. So the decision on whether to observe it or not affects previously whether it's a particle or a wave. Now, some variations on this double-slit experiment show that when the decision about how to observe the light particle is made later, you still have the same particle or waveform decision effects going backwards into time. They also did this, what's called the quantum eraser experiment, where they would either erase one path of information or preserve one path of information. And they showed that once the decision was made, the particle would behave as if it had always been that way from the front. And then finally, in 2012, there was an entanglement swapping experiment done, where basically they entangled these two photons, and it showed that the photons turned out to be behaving as if they were already entangled in the past, even though they were entangled in the future. So what this is kind of telling us is that on a macro level and on a quantum level, that the linear progression of time, the sort of the time order that we perceive things, like here's one event, here's the next event, we think in terms of this linear story-based time. But that might not be how it works. And we've heard a lot of spiritual teachers talk about, everything is the ever-present now moment. The past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, because it's all occurring in the now. But that's kind of a tough concept to understand. So in shamanism, and I'm an apprentice of a shaman, we often think about spiral time and cyclical time. And if you've ever looked at the Native American medicine wheel, that's tracking the cycles of the year, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the day. There's a lot of ways that we can live in a more cyclical time. In regards to the spiral experience of time, we may have that coming back to re-experiencing the same thing, but from a more experienced or evolved perspective. So my question to you is, have you ever experienced that relationship thing I was talking about in the beginning, where you meet somebody and you already have a sense for what your relationship is going to be like? Or do you have any experiences where you've done some work on yourself, some healing work that has influenced maybe the past? I have a theory. This is something we're uncovering through our work in QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis, that if you were to heal lineage-based trauma, that you would affect the epigenetics of your lineage going forwards and backwards through time. So if you were to heal something for yourself, maybe that would change the epigenetics of your grandparents. That would be another future study that I think would be really cool to investigate. All right, there's some of the experimental evidence for retrocausality. Thanks so much for watching.